formed confederation. By 1870, most of the British troops had pulled out of Canada. The Canadian infantry was entirely composed of militia, which eventually evolved into the Canadian Army. Fort Henry came under the ownership of the Canadian Department of National Defence, which owned the fort until 1999, when it was turned over to the Heritage Branch of Parks Canada. The British Army that had sustained the fort was obsolete, and in the 1870s the fort began a period of severe decline. Mother Nature became its biggest enemy as the harsh Canadian winters took their toll. The fort was built using local limestone, and British military designers of the time did not take into consideration Kingston's microclimate. The freeze-thaw cycles during the winters gradually caused the limestone to chip and split. The fort was equipped with a flat roof over the major part of the fortification, the redoubt, which allowed water to seep down into the stone.
We have photographs that show the fort during that phase where entire sections of the outer wall have essentially peeled away and fallen into the ditch.
Restoration was undertaken during the 1930s under Ronald L. Way, who was brought in to restore the fort. The effort was a joint federal and provincial operation and was a make-work project during the Great Depression.
This is when actually the fort saw a resurgence, and there was an amazing job to restore the fort to as much of its original capacity as they could, and they did a phenomenal job with that. They were essentially using the same techniques that were used by the people who originally built the fort back in the 1830s. So that's fairly phenomenal. When we think of the period during the restoration from 1936 to 38, they did within 2 years an incredible amount of work.
The Prime Minister of Canada, William Lyon Mackenzie King, officially opened the fort to public visitation on August 1, 1938. Unfortunately, the timing was poor, and Canada was almost immediately thrown into the Second World War. The Canadian Army requisitioned the fort and turned it into a prisoner of war camp. Prisoners included an entire U-boat crew and Luftwaffe personnel. After the war, Ronald Way was once again brought in to restore the fort. He was quoted as saying that it took as much to restore the fort after the Canadian Army had left as it did after the Depression. The fort was reopened to the public in 1948.
One of the unique features about Fort Henry is not only do you see the actual fortification, but Ronald Way was very perceptive in his time. He was one of the forerunners of what he later came to call living history. And the interesting part about that was that he said that if I restore the fort, then I'll have just another sort of static museum. But if I actually animate it with people who are walking around recreating what the garrison itself looked like, we'd have a really unique opportunity here. And so he instituted something which was here for the official opening back in 1938 called the Fort Henry Guard. And it was basically his interpretation of what the British garrison would have been at the time.
The Fort Henry Guard recreates the drill of an 1867 British military unit. The Guard has two subunits, the Drill Squad and the Corps of Drums. The Drill Squad uses Snider Enfield rifles that date to that period. The subunits perform on the parade square at various times throughout the day. 3 times a day, artillerymen fire the large cannons overlooking Lake Ontario. The Guard is instrumental in bringing the fort to life for the nearly 160,000 visitors a year. The Fort Henry Guard is made up of university, college, and high school students. Few have any military experience, and they are not affiliated in any way with the Canadian military. Training is intense, and the Guard has high standards, but students enjoy returning year after year. Another yearly returning member of the Fort Henry Guard is its mascot, David the Goat. Adopting a mascot was a tradition of many British regiments. The Fort Henry Guard chose a white goat in honor of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, who were stationed at Fort Henry from 1842 to 1843. The goat was named David after the patron saint of Wales. Another tradition, one dating back to 1954, is the yearly sunset ceremony with the United States Marine Corps. Nearly every summer, the Silent Drill Platoon and the Drum and Bugle Corps travel from the 8th and I Barracks in Washington, D.C. to Fort Henry to perform this special ceremony with the Fort Henry Guard.
Ronald L. Way, when he was starting things back off in the 1950s, just after the Second World War, was looking